What's up, guys? I'm Sci-Hi, back with another deck tech for Historic. Today we're going to look at this so-called Colorless Ugin Ramp deck, which is really kind of like a Urzatron deck in Historic that's kind of just existing on the fringe right now, but seen it play at every tier from gold to mythic, at least in fringe numbers. So I think this deck is really powerful. It's definitely interesting. It's got one of the strongest, if not the strongest, late games of any of the decks currently being run. So at least for that reason, it's worth inspecting and taking a look at. This may be a little bit of an unorthodox version of it, being that it's not completely colorless. We do have a light black splash, but we'll take a look at the core of the deck and kind of the twist this specific build I have going has for it. But if you're not familiar with these or haven't come up against this in the ladder yet, because they are still not very high in numbers, but it'll be interesting to see if they pick up, if there's any printing of new cards that can push this thing stronger, or if people can figure out a way to just make it more consistent and be able to pack a punch against some of these other decks that get the best of it. But general idea is obviously you're just ramping up with a lot of mana artifacts like Coldsteel Heart, Guardian Idol is pretty much a staple, being that it's colorless, and Mind Stone, as well as Hedron Archives. Just trying to ramp up to a big, huge payoff like an Ulamog or an Ugin, the Spirit Dragon, or his smaller little bro, Ugin, the Ineffable, which is also awesome, and also has the colorless spells you cast cost 2 less to cast, so it also facilitates easier casting of these high casting cost things. But we'll talk about the general idea of this deck, what it's good at and what its weaknesses are. Then we'll just look at all these individual card choices, and then we'll look at kind of an interesting toolbox strategy you can do with Karn, the Great Creator, as well. But so as I already said, like, these decks they have some of the best late game of any of the decks in the format right now, because you're just running such powerful spells. Like even control, like they can't do anything against an Ulamog. Even if they counter it, you're still getting to exile 2 things. You just got such powerful, hard-hitting planeswalkers that it's just got a super powerful end game. Also interesting, we get to run tons of utility colorless lands in this deck, because we're only really supporting colorless with a light splash, and we'll take a look at all of them in a moment. But some of the weaknesses of this deck are that despite being so powerful, you can't exactly win very quickly, besides like resolving a huge spell and having your opponent tap out, which is kind of winning quickly. But what I mean is that you can't just roll somebody over like an aggro deck on turn 3 or 4 with this. You just can't explicitly kill them out of the game. And also you're susceptible as well to just fast aggro and combo decks, which can be tricky to deal with early, since our late game is so good. But our early game, usually a lot of these decks, the way they're built, for the first 2, 3, even 4 turns, some of these decks do nothing but just cast mana rocks and just sit there and get killed before they get to do anything too cool. So the way I've built this, and you'll see a lot of other people trying to build in a way where you can kind of try to protect against the early game. So in this particular version, we have a small black splash, and there's going to be some tension between trying to make black mana as well as a ton of colorless mana, because we are going to be using a powerful artifact to get more bang out of our colorless lands. But we'll take a look at that in a moment. But for these black cards to try to survive the early game, we've got 4 Bloodchief's Thirsts, we've got 2 Eliminates, and then just for general sweepability board wipes, we've got 4 Extinction Events, which has been really an underrated card. The ability to just select and usually wipe all the most important creatures off the board, but not only just killing them, but exiling them, can be very relevant, especially in Historic format where there's a lot of things that can just come back to kill you. So exiling everything is very good. So that's the black splash in this deck. This is really just for crowd control, creature control. It's important to have some things that just kill creatures early and cheaply so that we could actually survive to the late game to get to cast these awesome spells and just win from there. So again, it's important to have like Eliminates and Bloodchief's Thirst. Also, Bloodchief's Thirst is good in that you can kill not just small creatures, but you can kill any creature once you have enough mana to pay the kicker cost. And of course, you can kill planeswalkers as well. So even if your opponent's not running any creatures, but they have powerful planeswalkers, maybe the mirror match, it's not going to be a dead card. You can at least still take out a powerful planeswalker with this. Also in the 1-drop spot, I mentioned we're susceptible in this deck to like fast combo decks. So we have to have a way to at least try to keep up appearances and deal with opponents' graveyards. Fight the good fight. But also we don't want to like just run a bunch of Tormod's Crypts or something to deal with graveyards blindly against decks where maybe they're not even using the graveyard, then it's just a dead card. So in the main deck, we've got 2 Relics of Progenitus, which very low opportunity cost. We can cast this on the first turn. If our opponent is a graveyard deck, excellent. We can just start exiling cards from the graveyard straight away. If they aren't a graveyard deck, it's not that big of a deal either. We don't sacrifice that much time or resources to get this out. And we can always just pay the 1 colorless, exile it, get our card, and move on. It's just going to cycle through the deck to find more powerful, relevant things. So just got 2 copies floating around in the deck. I could see even going up on these, especially if graveyard decks continue their popularity or increase. You can certainly tweak these numbers. But then moving on to the 2-drops slot, we already talked about Eliminate. We've got 4 Coldsteel Hearts. This is an interesting mana rock because, of course, it is the only mana rock in the deck or mana artifact that creates colored mana. So I mentioned there's kind of this tension between we want to create a lot of colorless, but we also need to have enough sources of black so we can support this light black splash. So we've got 4 Coldsteel Hearts to facilitate that. We just choose black when we cast it, of course. Talked a little bit about the Guardian Idols. This is pretty much a staple in this archetype. Solid 2 colorless to produce 1 mana rock. Does come into play tap, but it has the cool ability of it can actually become a 2/2 golem, which is good. You can dodge sweepers effects with this. We don't have to worry about hitting it with our own sweeper because it's only a creature when we choose to activate it, of course. It's a good mana rock, good golem. He can pressure opposing planeswalkers, which is excellent. So this is a 4 of inclusion, solid card in the archetype, kind of one of the namesake cards that you see a lot of different variations to these builds, but most of the people that run this deck and build it, consensus is pretty solid on 4 copies of Guardian Idol. Then we got 1 floating copy of Mind Stone, just another mana rock that we can also cycle to draw cards. So it's good early, it's good late, because we can always cycle it if we already have a ton of mana. Not that big of an opportunity cost there. Another good mana rock. Moving on to the 4-drop spot. Already mentioned the Extinction Events. We have 2 additional mana rocks in Hedron Archive. Could potentially see even upping this to 3 for the other Mind Stone, just to get that much more oomph and make sure that you hit those important numbers of hitting 8 mana as soon as possible so you can resolve the powerful Ugin, the Spirit Dragon. So we've got 2 Hedron Archives. It's really just like a Mind Stone on steroids, really. It's just double everything that Mind Stone does. Double the mana, double the casting cost, double the card draw. Definitely a sweet mana rock in this archetype for sure. Then we get to the interesting 3 copies of Karn, the Great Creator. So this Planeswalker has been really interesting in Modern and other formats for its Toolbox ability. It's one of those cards that just has the potential of getting better in time. The more artifacts that are printed just opens up the amount of different things you can go find with this guy, as well as he can indirectly get nerfed as they ban really good artifacts like we saw with Mycosynth Lattice in Modern, which was a 2-card, essentially a 1-card combo with Karn fetching the total lock piece. But that's Modern. We're talking historic, so I digress. But with Karn the Great Creator, we have that awesome ability to toolbox for any artifact in our 7-card sideboard, which we'll take a look at what we can grab with him. But it's also got the static ability of activated abilities of artifacts your opponents control can't be activated. This is a bomb in the mirror match. Shut off all of their mana producing rocks immediately once this layered effect is in play. So he's really powerful. And then beyond the tutoring toolbox ability, you can of course you can +1 and turn one of your artifacts into one of your non-creature artifacts becomes an animated creature artifact based on its casting cost, which actually can become very relevant a lot of times. Surprisingly, in this deck, sometimes you can finish people off by just animating an archive or another large artifact that we can get in our toolbox, which we can take a look at now, which is always really fun, especially in best of one formats, to craft and build out a silver bullet list of just awesome, powerful artifacts. So we certainly have them here. So again, with Karn, the Great Creator, we can just -2 ability. We reveal an artifact we own from outside the game. So in this case, it's in our sideboard. We can get any one of these artifacts. So we can often cast Karn. A lot of times, look at the first choice you'll be making is the powerful Forsaken Monument, 5 colorless. All your colorless creatures get +2/+2, and it doubles the amount of colorless mana your colorless sources produce, as well as every time you cast a colorless spell, you're gaining 2 life. So this is another staple in this format. And this is very much a toolbox version of the deck. Certainly an argument could be made, and let me know in the comments how you guys build these decks, or if you roll with this deck. Love to see your lists. People have been sharing lists with me. I love that. By all means, direct message me or leave lists in the comments. I love to look at other lists that people are rolling with, but I could certainly see an argument to be made to put multiple Forsaken Monuments in your deck just because it's so powerful. In this instance, we just have the one floating in the sideboard to toolbox for. Obviously, it's legendary, so you can't get any benefit from having multiple in play. If you do run multiple in the deck, it's just purely for redundancy and just trying to draw it. But because we can search it, we can reliably get it with Karn, and a lot of times it's your first choice. Also, sometimes you don't even need this. As powerful as it is, it doesn't do anything on its own, doesn't win the game. It's just a facilitating card. So for that reason, I don't mind having a toolbox and find this, but I certainly could see a straightforward build where you just main deck these, and so you don't have to waste the time to search for them. You can just jam them as soon as possible. But there are situations where you've already reached critical amount of mana and you just don't even need this. Like, it's more important just to get a powerful spell to win the game with. So that's kind of my philosophy with Forsaken Monument, but I'm curious what you guys think. Again, let me know in the comments. But moving on, we'll look at the other cards that we can tutor for with our toolbox Karn. More graveyard hate. We've got trusty Grafdigger's Cage. We want to grab this early, if we're up against one of these graveyard combo decks. We just need to jam this onto the board as soon as possible so that our opponent can't reanimate a powerful creature from the graveyard or cast some devastating card like Emergent Ultimatum, etc. So we've got one copy of the Cage ready to go. We've also got another kind of hate card in Sorcerer's Spyglass. If we don't really know what's going on, this can be a good card just to see our opponent's hand and try to learn what their deck is and what they're trying to do. And hopefully we'll know what card to name. Maybe we understand they're running control and they've got a Teferi, and so we can shut that down, or whatever it may be, we can shut it down with Sorcerer's Spyglass. Stop all activated abilities from a source of any card we choose, so getting to look at the opponent's hand before we choose is very beneficial, especially when we're just blindly playing ladder games and we don't know what the opponent's running. So definitely a good card here in Sorcerer's Spyglass. One copy to go fetch up. Moving on, we've got the one Golos Tireless Pilgrim, which is another card you'll see in a lot of these big ramp decks. It's a 5 colorless, 3/5, but when he comes into play, you get to search for any land, not just a basic, but any land, put it onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. And he's got the crazy ability of 5 every color of mana plus 2 colorless, 7 total. You get to spin the wheel, kind of exile the top 3 cards of your library, and you get to cast or play all of them without paying their mana cost. So oftentimes you'll see people pair Golos with one copy of the land Cascading Cataracts, which we'll get to covering the whole lands in a moment. But obviously, as you can see here, if you're not already familiar with this, Cascading Cataracts, indestructible. It adds a colorless, which is what we want, but then it also has the interesting ability of 5 colorless to add 5 mana any combination of colors. So this is the best friend of Golos, because you just go fetch that, and now you have a solution to making all this colored mana, and you can use its powerful late game ability to just churn through your deck and just cast powerful things for free. We talked about the Forsaken Monument. We've also got a God Pharaoh statue, just another bomb to go search up. 6 colorless, so another legendary artifact. This just cripples your opponent's ability to cast spells. They now all cost 2 more colorless. And then at the beginning of your end step, each opponent loses a life. So this could slowly drain a prison player that's using the Solemnity 9 lives prison combo. That doesn't prevent loss of life. So the loss of life is very relevant. It's a slow death for sure, but a lot of times that's just gravy, really just the crippling effect against some spell-heavy decks of making all their spells cost 2 more colorless can just be really backbreaking. And then we got another fun one to search up, Planar Bridge, 6 colorless, yet another legendary artifact. Yeah, again, these are all these silver bullet crazy artifacts we can go search up. But Planar Bridge is really quite something. 6 colorless. It's certainly, a little bit slow to set up, but when the time calls for it, this can just absolutely end the game. So you got a 6 colorless legendary artifact. For 8 colorless, you get to search your library for any permanent and just throw that directly into play. So you get this into play. Now you've got a tutor that can just find basically anything in your deck and just throw it into play. Just throw an Ulamog into play. You won't get the cast trigger, but it's a 10/10 indestructible that decks your opponent very fast. You just throw that into play. Throw an Ugin into play. Whatever you need to do, you can find it with Planar Bridge, turn after turn, and this should end the game if you have bought enough time and at least turn the corner in controlling the game. Finally, we've got Platinum Angel. Of course, everyone knows Platinum Angel, 7 colorless, 4/4 flyer. You can't lose the game. Your opponents can't win the game. Some of the most oppressive, interesting things ever written on a card. You don't even need to know how to play Magic to read that and scratch your head, say, what the hell is this? Seems like a pretty bullshit card. But this actually has a lot of use cases. Sometimes you get in just strange situations where maybe you're going to be decked and you need to use this to survive, or be surprised. This just wins the game against a lot of decks, to be honest, especially in best of one. A lot of decks they're just not built to handle this kind of card. If they just have, sometimes a lot of people, and myself included, build best of one decks very straightforward, where you don't have an answer to everything. Maybe you don't even have any way to kill creatures or artifacts, and this just ends the game on the spot. It's going to win the game. So that's the 7-card Toolbox kit. Let me know, of course, in the comments what other things could be worth searching for, because that's one of the fun things to do with these Toolbox type decks, is to craft your custom and personal just hit list of awesome cards to cast. But that's what we're rolling with here. Finally, moving on to the Planeswalkers. We've got Ugin the Ineffable. This is so powerful for 6 colorless. He makes all of your colorless spells cost 2 less to cast. The +1 ability, where you're exiling cards that become 2/2 colorless spirits, and whenever that creature leaves play, so it doesn't even matter if it's exiled, you just get the card. So this just further snowballs card advantage, and is very difficult to deal with. Extremely powerful Planeswalker, highly castable. At 6 mana is a piece of cake in a deck like this when we have all this ramp. So you can certainly see bumping this up to 4 copies as well, just to increase our payoff count. But it is powerful for sure. And also it's got the silver bullet ability of just being able to destroy any permanent that's at least 1 or more colors. So of course in the mirror match, it's not going to be able to kill anything at all, really, but against most decks, this is so valuable just to snowball and use the +1 effect. But again, just to facilitate 2 less to cast the next things up. So we've got 6, and we move all the way up to 8 in, of course, Ugin, the Spirit Dragon, one of the most powerful things you can possibly do in the game for 8 mana. And again, 8 mana is really not that difficult to achieve with the amount of ramping ability we have in this deck. Ugin, just, end the game type spell. You can exile. The exile ability is probably one of the most used things. You're just going to be able to... It's hard to lose, really, once you get one of these in play. You can exile everything that you need to in play. If there's just few targets, you can use the +2 ability to kill things. Quickly get ult. Hard to lose, even harder to lose after you ult. You're gaining 7 life, drawing 7 cards, putting permanents into play. Just a bomb powerhouse. This is the top end of the deck the whole point that we're trying to ramp up to this powerful planeswalker that usually just, against most decks, wins the game outright if they can't deal with it immediately. And finally, we've got one Ulamog, one of, if not my favorite card in existence. It's to actually cast this and get the cast trigger to exile any 2 permanents of your choosing is just beyond backbreaking for decks to deal with. So this is another top-end payoff card that we can get to. And it's extremely interesting in that you don't even need, with this guy in play, you don't even have to kill people by damage. Just the exiling the top 20 cards of their library is also backbreaking, and you can just, if you can't kill somebody by damage, again, maybe they have the 9 life Solemnity Prison combo, it doesn't freaking matter. You just exile their whole deck and kill them that way. So Ulamog, just a absolute bomb payoff card in this deck. And finally, we get to the lands. We've got a lot of different toolbox lands, and we'll just cover them all real quick. This is one of the boons and fun perks of running the colorless style deck. You get to run all these utility lands that do very valuable things. But I mentioned in the beginning there's tension between black and colorless mana. So we have to have enough black to support these black cards, but we also want a lot of colorless to make our Forsaken Monument more powerful. So we try to maximize lands that can produce both, really, if possible. So Crypt of the Eternals does just that. We've got 4 copies. We also gain a life just by playing this card. Can produce colorless, and you do have to pay 1 to make a black, but again, we've got so much land in this deck and mana rocks that's not that big of a deal just to get that black mana when we need to cast these cards. So 4 Crypt of the Eternals. Also in the similar vein, we've got 4 Aether Hubs. Similar effect, we get an energy token, which in other words is just we get a one-time use to make 1 black mana, which is often sufficient in the early game. Cast a Bloodchief Thirst, kill something, survive long enough till we can get one of these huge payoffs, win the game. But then, of course, it can also produce colorless, so it's got the best of both worlds. 2 copies of Blast Zone. This was a really, I still feel, underrated land when it first came out. I don't feel like there's a big enough buzz about this card, but you've quickly found it showing up in Urzatron decks and other colorless decks because, I mean, it's just so powerful to have a land that is flexible and that you can add counters and sacrifice it to just wipe out every permanent of a certain casting cost is truly powerful. So we've got 2 blast zones floating around the deck. Of course, as we're building up our mana base, ideally we don't really want to be sacrificing our lands unless we absolutely have to. And there are times when you'll be up against a really aggressive deck and you do need to just use your blast zone to maybe knock out 3 1 casting cost aggressive creatures. So we've got 2 copies of Blast Zone, already covered the Cascading Cataracts, 4 Crawling Barrens. This is one of the most powerful creature lands there is, in my opinion, especially in this archetype, because for 4 colorless, we can continually keep putting 2+1/+1 counters on the Crawling Barrens, and we choose when to animate it into a creature. So once it's gotten sufficiently large enough and the coast is clear, we can just absolutely beat down with this thing. And it's nice to have a constant mana sink. When we have so much mana, we always have something to do with it in this deck, it seems. So even when games where it just feels like all you're doing is just casting mana rocks and making all this mana, even if you don't draw your payoff spells immediately, chances are you're going to have these lands to just start building up, and they're going to get more and more powerful. So Crawling Barrens is really good. Another kind of underrated card in my opinion. Moving on, we've got 2 Interplanar Beacons. Just another colorless utility land. This one particularly is just a little bit more life gain. Is the only reason we're going to use this, is just to when we cast planeswalkers and we have enough of them that we can get multiple triggers off this to continually gain life. Moving on, we got 1 Inventors Fair, also gaining us life every turn. 1 life if we have 3 or more artifacts. But also we can search for an artifact as well, which is another type of tutoring ability. This doesn't come up as often, at least in this build I've configured here, because the things that we want to tutor for, of course, are not in the main deck. But that is something you can do. Sometimes it may be pertinent to get an idol, or a relic could be very important to tutor for this, to deal with some graveyard things that are menacing you. So in addition to just the life gain, there's no opportunity cost just for that, and then you do have the ability to tutor for artifacts, which is pretty sweet. Moving on, we've got 4 Radiant Fountains, just a simple gain 2 life for free, which is great. Again, help us survive the early game so we can get to our payoff spells. 4 Radiant Fountains. Finally, we've got 4 Spire of Industry, which I could have included up here. It's again in the same vein as Aether Hub, Crypt of the Eternals. Just an add colorless, but if we have to, we can pay a life if we have an artifact in play, which we of course will because we have so many mana rocks. So just another facilitating land to produce black or colorless to support our light black splash. But that's the deck in a nutshell. A quick run through of it. There's a lot of different ways to build these big colorless decks. As I talked about earlier, you can go with a red splash or even more heavy on red, just kind of like a big red planeswalker build. You can splash white to get similar creature control, crowd control type effects. Or you could just go straight up all colorless and say screw the splash and just go rely more heavily on hard casting Forsaken Monuments, maybe have them in your main deck. Go a little bit less on the tutor package and just try to brute force get your mana rocks in play quickly, like Hedron Archive, so that maybe you try to sacrifice a little bit of this early game defense by just getting more consistently to casting Ugin as fast as possible, which can be difficult if you're on the draw, especially if you don't splash for some of these creature kill cards. You can just get blown out so easily by fast aggro decks. And in fact, you still can, even when you run these, of course. Maybe you don't draw them or just cards don't line up well. It's still a lot of random elements in Magic, still luck involved. But we try to improve our deck by configuring things in a way where we can plan ahead for the ways we can die. And that's what these light splashes are for. But anyways, that's the deck, guys. I hope you like it. Let me know in the comments. If you're not already subscribed, please do so. It's free. I do all kinds of deck techs. We'll do more Mythic gameplay and strategy, other opinion videos. If you're already subscribed, thank you very much. Welcome back. I appreciate you guys watching the video to the end. And I said earlier, would love to hear more from you guys about these colorless decks. Like, I think they're really powerful. They just exist on the fringe. But it'll be interesting to see, like, if they ever really get up to prominence more and become more popular than they are right now, because they are a little bit fringe, but you still see it even in Mythic. There's still a healthy amount of this floated around, so definitely share your deck lists and ideas. What do you think is the best way to build these colorless Ugin ramp decks in Historic? I would love to hear from you guys and love to see some other builds. But until then, good luck on the ladder, guys. I'm Sci-Hi. Peace.